Hello, Kent Comfort here with Tallgrass Economics. Today we have a very special guest that I'm looking forward to having a conversation with, and I know you're going to enjoy it too. That guest is former Congressman Alan Grayson from Florida. A little few details here about Alan. As you probably recall, he was in Congress for 3 terms between 2009 and 2016. It's on the record that he passed more legislation between 13 and 16 than any other member of Congress. He was named most effective member of Congress and most productive member of Congress during that time. He was also the only member of Congress who raised most of his campaign funds from small donors, like less than $200 is what we're talking about here. He was also named Attorney of the Year by National Organization of Taxpayers Against Fraud. He holds 3 degrees from Harvard, all of them with honors. He completed his work, his PhD work, and general exams as well. So he's won many great legal victories that were reported on in the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, New York Times, CNN, and 60 Minutes, and so forth. So I think we all know who Mr. Grayson is and appreciate who he is. And I'm really looking forward to sharing this conversation with you. So here he is, Mr. Alan Grayson. Here we go. Good afternoon, Congressman Grayson. It's great to have you here today. I really appreciate your taking time to visit with us here at Tallgrass Economics.
My pleasure. Always good to join people who are doing good things.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Tallgrass Economics is an organization that does extensive research and reporting on the general state and condition of the long-term care industry. Dr. Kingsley spends a lot of time researching the 10Ks of some of these large corporations that own what we hear now is about 70% of the physical plants around the country that take care of our elderly. And we're learning that they don't do it extremely well. In a lot of cases, there's been some serious infractions. And we also know that there's been a death rate in the COVID period of about 140,000 people, which is a major percentage of the total losses that we've had in the country. And that's the largest single institutional death rate, I think, probably in the history of the country. The reason I bring this up to you right now to start with is that I noticed in learning about you that you did your master's thesis in gerontology. I'd love to hear about how that came about and what your perspectives are on this particular.
Well, at that time in the mid 80s, there were organizations that were national organizations promoting research on heart health, the American Heart Association, on cancer, the American Cancer Society, on diabetes, and so on. Every major disease had its own national organization that existed to provide support to the victims of the disease, but also to encourage health research and trying to understand the disease and treat it better. There was nothing like that for the aging process itself. But if you're familiar with what's called the Gompertz curve, you know that the chance of dying from heart disease doubles every 7 years after you're 30. The chance of dying from cancer doubles every 7 years after you're 30. The chance of dying from stroke doubles every 7 years after you're 30. The chance of dying from accidents doubles every 7 years after you're 30, and so on. So it's clear that there is an underlying process called aging that manifests itself in all these different ways as diseases. But there was no national organization to promote research on aging. And in fact, at that time in the 80s, there were only 50 people in the entire world, research gerontologists, who were trying to understand the basis for the aging process. So I proposed that such an organization was needed, and it came into existence 2 years later, called the Alliance for Aging Research. I was an officer of that organization for more than 2 decades until I was elected to Congress in 2008. And we increased research on aging by 600% during the time that I was involved in the organization.
Amazing.
And really galvanized support for aging research and understanding aging as a discrete phenomenon itself.
That's really an interesting history, and you've provided some statistical information there that I was not familiar with. That's good to know. There's a lot of concerns. It's sort of an invisible crisis when you start really looking at what's going on in the industry. And we're hoping that the information that we put out there, which kind of conflicts with what is being reported to Congress by the industry itself, they're claiming that they're in dire straits financially and need taxpayer assistance and bailouts and so forth. And when you look at their 10Ks, they're doing really well. So we're
Well,
looking.
of course. I mean, they have a guaranteed market and a huge public subsidy. Social Security and Medicare are huge public subsidies. So naturally, they would be doing well. It's almost a no lose proposition, especially if you are willing to cut corners. It's a smaller example of what we see sort of as a pervasive phenomenon in healthcare in general, which is that for-profit institutions charge as much as they possibly can. They give as little as they can in return in care, and they call the difference profit. And that accounts for 1/7 of the economy right now. So when you introduce the profit motive, you're automatically creating a conflict of interest between the people who own the business and the shareholders and the officers and the executive compensation committee and so on, versus the people who actually are receiving the service. And in other countries, they take care of that problem through government sponsorship, like the public health care that you receive in the UK and Canada and so on. This is a smaller example of that, but given what you just said, one where there's been horrifying failure. My uncle died in a nursing home from COVID a little bit after Thanksgiving. And I'm quite familiar with the fact that that year was disastrous for seniors all around the country. More than 10% of every person in New Jersey in a nursing home, I heard, died of COVID last year.
Wow.
And that's just one state, one example.
Sure.
It's an example that was repeated as the year went on in many other places as well. The fact is that the entire country was woefully unprepared, led by leadership that can only be described as malicious and irresponsible. And the result of that is that, with limited counterexamples, the country went through this paroxysm of pain and suffering without any leadership and without any sensible solutions. The virus defeated us, to put it bluntly. In Australia, the virus was defeated. In New Zealand, the virus was defeated. In South Korea, the virus was defeated. And here, the virus beat us. And we lost so many of our compatriots as a result of that.
That's a perfectly stated, a good encapsulation of exactly what happened. I too lost an uncle to COVID, and this is going to go down for most of us as every one of us knows someone or is close to someone who died as a result of that. It was that far-reaching, and like you say, the leadership, and we're giving leadership a bad name, calling it leadership in this case when it comes to what we went through. I'm very interested in hearing about what Alan Grayson is up to these days. Did I pick up a rumor somewhere that running for Senate might be something that's being evaluated?
Yes, right now we're looking at a race against Marco Rubio
Yes.
for the U.S. Senate. And it's a funny thing to say, but Florida, the land of the senior
Yes.
citizens, very badly needs a champion for seniors. Hasn't had one for a long time. Going back to decades ago. Florida needs somebody who will increase Social Security when there hasn't been an increase in Social Security benefits other than the COLAs for 40 years and more.
Right.
Florida needs someone who will expand Medicare to cover eyes, ears, and teeth, which were arbitrary exclusions written up for who knows what reason in 1965. Just 2 lines in a statute that goes on for more than 50 pages. And so on. We haven't had a champion for seniors in Florida and around the country since Claude Pepper, and it is long overdue. My organization, the Alliance for Aging Research, used to hand out an annual award called the Claude Pepper Award to the elected official who did the most to help seniors each year. Well, I'm still hoping to win that award one day, and I will fight hard for it if I get back into public office.
That's really good news for Florida. I was even though I'm a Midwesterner, I was a big fan of Congressman Alan Grayson back when you were in office because I felt like you were kind of a lone voice for the people in that time. And that was before all the crazies were, kind of trying to get a hold of everything. And the seemed to me like the corporate media and even some members of your own party were made efforts to marginalize you and your efforts to be that voice. So if there's
Well,
another Alan Grayson type voice in Congress today, would you tell me who they are? I can't think of anybody.
you can look that one up. The Democratic Party stopped at nothing to thwart me the last time I ran against Marco Rubio. It was only the second time in history that the party ever spent money in a contested Senate primary. They spent more than $1 million against me and for my opponent for the worst possible reason. My opponent's father promised the party $10 million if he were the nominee. And that was real money to the party.
Money
So
talks.
they really stopped at nothing to defeat me in that primary. He ended up giving them $500,000. So, at least they got that out of it. It wasn't 10 million, it was $500,000 and when the fact actually occurred. But no, they weren't looking to help me. And it's sad because I was, according to Slate Magazine and Business Insider, the most effective member of Congress.
Yes.
When I sat down with the head of the party at the time, the DSCC, and he asked me to explain why I was running, the first thing I mentioned to him was the fact that I had passed more laws than any other member of Congress, even though I was a Democrat and the Republicans were in charge back then.
Yeah.
And you had to get Republican support for every single thing that you wanted to pass. And I passed 121 good, solid, progressive laws in the last 4 years that I was in Congress. No one else even came close. And that's despite the fact that everything I had to do, I had to justify well enough so that I could pick up 20 or 30 or 40 Republican votes every single time.
Impressive. Clearly, you're hard to say no to. There's got to be something going on there too.
Well, thanks. The stakes are huge.
Yes.
Everything that I passed was every single time a good, solid, progressive bill to meet some human need.
Sure.
And the needs are still there. If anything, they've grown. And the crazies took over Washington after I left.
Yep.
Now it's time to go back and defeat them.
Absolutely right. I'm really thrilled to hear that that's in the plans and that you're headed that way.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, we'll have a website up. It'll be graysonforsenate.org, assuming we go ahead with this plan. And I would invite everybody to come and to support the campaign.
There probably needs to be a link for that on the Tallgrass Economics website. So I'll look forward to watching for that. Yeah, is this a reasonable comparison? I've thought of you as Alan Grayson was to the House what Al Franken was to the Senate.
Well, thanks. I mean, I'm an admirer of Al Franken. I try to do something that he tried to do that very few people in public life try to do, which is occasionally to be funny. Those people who sign up for our emails, I think, have the occasional treat. Our emails don't sound or look like anybody else's. And the reason for that is that like Senator Al, I realized that there's sort of a zany, oh God, how do you describe it? Sardonic view that you can take of this. And if you have enough, how do I put this? Self-assurance, then you can express it. What happens in public life, and particularly among the Democrats, I think, is that people are constantly biting their tongues. Now, there's a lot of people who are privately funny in Congress, sometimes unintentionally so, but very few people actually attempt to be funny in real life because they constantly are biting their tongues and worried about, the next hit from Politico or The Hill or Roll Call.
Yeah.
And they don't want to say anything that might get them in trouble. Well, it turns out that the world is a strange, but interesting and sometimes funny place. And Al and I think, both tried to bring that about. I am delighted by the fact that even for just 1.5 terms, Al Franken was there in the Senate, having written a book called Rush Limbaugh is a Big Fat Idiot. I will always cherish that. A man like that, who was the author of that book, which I read, by the way, ended up being in the U.S. Senate.
Right. And his book, Giant in the Senate, which I read, was an eye opener. If you want to find out how the sausage is made, that's a good book. That was a good book to read. So, well,
Yeah, I mean, I think that people who read our emails get the same thing in bits and pieces.
good.
I make a point of sharing with people what it's like to actually be on the inside. I think I was more of a mover than an observer, but I tried to do both as well as I
Right.
could,
Right.
and it was truly fascinating. And everything that people feel about the fact that there's so many feckless Democrats, it's all true. A certain number of the Republicans are crazy. A certain number of them are just basically moving up the ladder as best they can,
Right.
trying to keep their head down, trying to get that $174,000
Yep.
year salary.
Yep.
So
Polishing
they're
their
kind of
casey
an
resume.
interesting
Yep.
and divided group. The Democrats, they could use a lot more courage. Let me put it that way.
That's well said. And I always appreciated that you didn't bite your tongue when it really mattered. So that we can look forward to more of that, I hope. How does someone in that world, in your world, keep from losing their soul in the process?
It's a really interesting and profound question. I felt I was in danger of that my first term because the party was telling me over and over again, don't do anything except ask rich people for money and take as many of those $2,400 checks. Now it's $2,900. The price of someone's vote's gone up. To get all those $2,400 checks you possibly can, and just shut up and keep your fingers crossed and run all those 30-second ads in the next election disparaging your opponent. And I was getting really depressed by this, and it was starting to kind of get to me. I had already made my mark in exposing the under the table bailouts the Federal Reserve was handing out to people. It turned out to be $23 trillion, according to the Government Accountability Office. We didn't know that at the
Wow.
time, but I was doing my best to expose it. Actually did join with Ron Paul to pass and audit the Fed bill, the first one in history. And this was starting to have an impact. And so Dan Rather, who was a personal hero of mine when I was growing up, during the Nixon administration in particular, Dan Rather came to do an interview. And I said to him, look, Dan, you've seen a lot of people come and go here. I'm getting all this pressure to conform. What should I do? Everyone says I won in a what's called an R+5 district, a district that was heavily Republican.
Yes.
And I'd won by only 3 or 4 points. And everyone was saying I had, all I could do is just focus on the next election, raise money, and do nothing else. And what should I do? So Dan Rather said to me, well, you could do it that way. You'll find that you might lose anyway. And if you lose, you'll feel miserable. You'll feel like you missed the opportunity of your life. He said, if you win, you're still going to feel miserable because you have not shown proper respect for this job and the people who sent you here.
Yeah.
He said, if you do it the way that you want to do it and show respect for the job and fight for what's right, you'll feel good whether you win or lose. And he was right. I lost by 18 points, but then 2 years later, I won by 25, which was the biggest turnaround in the history of the U.S. House, and still is, by the way. No one had ever got a 43-point swing in just 2 years or even any length of time.
Yeah.
And I always remembered what Dan Rather had told me about that. It was a real turning point for me. It was not long after that I went on the floor of the House and described the Republican healthcare plan. Don't get sick. And if you do get sick, die quickly.
I remember that. And I remember how the media went after you for saying that. And all it was the truth. So, that was hard to take.
Well, for the Republicans, the truth hurts.
That's right. It does, doesn't it? Doesn't it? So you've sort of maybe answered this question. I'll make this the last question because we're coming up on the time you were kind enough to allot. What's your primary focus, your greatest social concern that causes you to get out of bed in the morning and say, I can't live with this. I've got to do something about it. You may have sort of already answered it, but I'd like to hear that focused on here as a close.
It's the neglect we show towards seniors. I mean, these are the people who created the goods and services that we've been consuming now over the course of, in most cases, a 40-year work life. They're just too old to keep it up, too frail, in many cases too sick. and we don't do enough for them. To go for 40 years plus without a single dollar increase in Social Security when the gross national product has more than doubled, it's more than tripled, is to me tragic. It's horrific. Why don't we show more respect? It says in the Bible, honor thy mother and father. What do we think that means? And the fact that you could go like my father did with a broken tooth in the front of his mouth for the last few years of his life because Medicare doesn't cover your teeth or your eyes or your ears, covers the rest of your head, rest of your body, but not your eyes or ears or your teeth. I ask myself, like, what is the point of that? How can that be morally justifiable? We make a promise, except we leave out parts of your head. What is the sense of that? This is how I felt when I was in Congress before, when I was much younger. Now that I'm coming up myself, close to retirement age, I realize it's personal at this point, but it always was personal for me. That's why my master's thesis in my 20s was about gerontology and public policy, and why I spent more than 20 years of my life as an officer of the Alliance for Aging Research. We have to do better by people who are in need in general, but in particular, we have to do better by seniors because they have done so well by us. My mother, my father, everyone who contributed to my well-being, I owe everything to them. And that's something that we have to appreciate a great deal more.
That our national disregard for our elders is a real travesty and a real uphill battle, I know, but great work. Really looking forward to seeing what you're doing. I'm going to subscribe to your email. I could use a good laugh. So really appreciate your taking the time, Alan, to talk to us today. This is going to be very helpful. It's going to be much appreciated, and I think it's going to be widely viewed.
My pleasure to you and every single one in your audience, because everyone in your audience is part of the same group. It's part of the people, idealistic people who want to make the world a better place. That's what you do. That's what the people in your audience do. And
Right.
we're the only ones who in the long run really matter. It's not the greed heads. It's not the selfish ones who matter. It's the people who want to make the world a better place. And every once in a while we succeed.
Absolutely. And thanks again so much for your personal sacrifice to that end. And we'll be watching closely and looking forward to supporting you in your efforts.
Thank you very much. Take
Have a
care.
great holiday weekend.
Thank you too. It's a delight to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you.